Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. This is intended to be a brief video just reporting on some breaking and unfortunate news. I'm quoting from an article on boxingscene.com, which is an official statement by Golden Boy Promotions. The headline is Canelo test positive for Clenbuterol ahead of Golovkin fight. Now the article or the statement is clearly written from Golden Boy Promotions, who represent Canelo, so one could argue that there is an element of them wanting to support their man, but I'm going to quote it to you. As part of the voluntary testing program that Canelo Alvarez insisted on ahead of his May 5th fight, one of his results came back positive for trace levels of Clenbuterol, consistent with meat contamination that has impacted dozens of athletes in Mexico over the last years. As the director of the VADA accredited lab that conducted the test stated in his letter today, these values are all within the range of what is expected from meat contamination. Upon receiving this information, Golden Boy immediately notified the Nevada State Athletic Commission and Gennady Golovkin's promoter, Tom Loeffler. As has been planned, Canelo will immediately move his training camp from Mexico to the United States and will submit to any number and variety of additional tests that VADA deems necessary ahead and after May 5th. Canelo added, "I'm an athlete who respects the sport, and this surprises me and bothers me because it had never happened to me. I will submit to all the tests that require me to clarify this embarrassing situation, and I trust at the end the truth will prevail." Canelo has tested clean dozens of times over the course of his 12 previous fights. Saul Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin will return to the ring on May 5th at the T-Mobile Arena. Interesting stuff. So look, the first thing to say is, based on this statement, it appears the fight is still on. It'd be interesting to see from the Golovkin side how they react to this news. The statement, for me, is clearly in defence of Canelo. It does come across as defensive. In actually the first sentence of the main body of the text, it states that the levels that he tested positive for are consistent with meat contamination that has impacted dozens of athletes in Mexico over the last years. So you're getting a defensive statement immediately within the first sentence of the body of the text. They've then got the director of the lab that conducted the tests stating that the values are in the range that are expected from meat contamination. They're saying that Canelo insisted on the testing, and they're saying Canelo's tested clean dozens of times, and in response to this will submit to further tests and relocate his camp. You know, I'm no expert on drug testing. I don't claim to be a scientist. It always makes me laugh a little bit, the amount of boxing fans who, overnight seem to have scientific knowledge on these drugs whenever one of these cases arises. So I'm not in a position, really, I don't have the knowledge, the expertise, I haven't had the time to do the research to give you my own opinion on whether or not levels of Clenbuterol that Canelo has tested positive for would be consistent with meat contamination, and whether it is a thing that this has affected dozens and dozens of athletes from Mexico. You know, I'm just not in a position where I'm informed enough to give you a solid opinion on that. All I will say is that it's a bad look for the sport. It's going to be another occasion of a guy getting into the ring and fighting and competing in a dangerous and deadly sport, potentially, where we know that at some point in the training camp, that fighter has had traces of a performance-enhancing drug or something that is considered of that nature in their system. I think it's a bad look for the sport, and I do find it kind of frustrating that when you have a fighter who's a definite A-side, like Canelo Alvarez, a fight like this seemingly goes ahead. You know, had this been Canelo Alvarez's opponent, be that Gennady Golovkin or be that someone else who tested positive for Clenbuterol, I'd be very, very interested to know if Canelo would still step in the ring and still fight them on that basis. So I think that's an unattractive look. I guess one thing that is a positive is Canelo is someone who is always considered a protected fighter by the people around him, certainly in terms of decisions that he's had in his career to date and that sort of thing. The fact that he has failed a drug test, the fact that he has, tested positive for a performance-enhancing drugs, shows that, to an extent, the testers are doing their job, and that, despite Canelo's celebrity and despite the fact that he is who he is and he's got the people around him that he does, he's not simply immune to these things. And that he is getting called out and they are having to release statements on it. I think that is a positive. We will, of course, have to see how it's handled thereafter, and I will await with interest, further statements and further commentary on the matter. I'll be very interested to hear what Tom Loeffler has to say on the issue, and you would presume from a Golovkin perspective that they don't really have too many options other than to continue with the fight. In terms of the options that are available to Golovkin from a financial perspective, from a profile perspective, and from a legacy perspective. Despite this news, Canelo Alvarez surely still represents by a country mile the most attractive option. But nevertheless, I do think it's unfortunate, and I know what hardcore boxing fans are like. This is not something that will be forgotten. This is something that will be referred to consistently as we get closer to the fight. And if Canelo Alvarez emerges victorious, it will be something that will be remembered and referred to after the decision. Very, very, very difficult. And with the amount of money that goes into Canelo and his career, I would assume that he'd be someone who would have nutritional experts, dietitians, attached to his camp. That would be my instinct. Maybe my instinct was wrong. I'm kind of surprised that in this day and age, with advanced sports science, with advanced sports nutrition, etc., I'm kind of surprised that you can even use the explanation that meat's been contaminated. You would think that if this was a common thing, so common that it's affected dozens of athletes in Mexico, that with the amount of money involved in someone like Canelo, you'd be able to source your meat from a additional source. But I don't know. Again, it's something that's slightly outside of my area of expertise. But it's an uncomfortable one. It doesn't make for good reading. It is one of those that leaves a bit of a bad taste in the mouth, and regrettably, it probably is one of those that, yet again, is another black eye for the sport. I talked on the channel quite openly about the knockout that Alexander Povetkin scored over Johan Duhaupas. And the Povetkin situation seems to be a complicated situation. There seems to be conflicting points of view on Povetkin and his run-ins with performance-enhancing drugs. But what I will say is I found it particularly uncomfortable to watch Johan Duhaupas rendered unconscious in very, very chilling fashion after, just before that fight went ahead, Povetkin had a further performance-enhancing drug controversy. I found it particularly uncomfortable to see such a chilling knockout when there had been a performance-enhancing drug controversy so close to that fight. I'm not saying the same thing's going to happen in Canelo Golovkin 2, but if something were to happen, or if it was a fight where Canelo showed real improvements, or if Canelo was able to hurt Golovkin and stop Golovkin, I'm sure lots of people like myself would again feel a sense of uncomfortableness. You always kind of get that when you have a sport that is unfortunately marred with performance-enhancing drugs. And in boxing, it's fair to say that if you look at the biggest names in the sport now, a number of the very, very biggest names have had run-ins of some variety, controversies with performance-enhancing drugs. So, doesn't make for comfortable reading from a fan perspective. Let me know your take. Leave your comments in the section below. Please hit the thumbs up button. Please subscribe if you are new.